Okay, and welcome to Lecture 6 on Daoism and Confucianism. So before we move away from the title slide, I want to point out that sometimes Taoism is spelled with a T. If you see Taoism spelled Taoism or just the word Tao with a T, it is still pronounced with a D sound. There are two ways of transliterating Chinese characters, which are like pictographs, into our alphabet, and one is more intuitive than the other. The more intuitive one replace the less intuitive one. You don't need to know all that, but just when you see certain Chinese words, you'll see them spelled in two different ways because there are these two different systems that are still in use. But we'll use Taoism with a D. So both of these traditions grew largely in China. They later spread to Japan and Korea. They have similar roots but different emphases. However, today and throughout most of history, Buddhism was more common in China once Buddhism was brought to China. And something we'll talk about later in more detail is that Taoism and Confucianism complement each other. They sort of work together and supplement each other. And for a lot of Chinese people, they'll practice both at the same time because they have different emphases. So ancient Chinese traditions. It's important to understand that China is an extremely old and continuous civilization. There's prehistorical evidence of ancestor worship in China, which makes sense because, as we mentioned with indigenous traditions, ancestor worship is a common indigenous practice, and we would expect to find indigenous practices in China before, like, Buddhism is brought there, for example. They used to believe in invisible spirits and a form of animism. They still do today. Animism is just believing that everything is animated, including rocks, trees, that everything has a spirit. Ancient China practiced divination, where they would read try to understand the present in such a way to be able to predict the future. And oracle bones was an example that was mentioned in the book. They used to believe in Shangdi, who was like a major god. The Lord on high is what it translates as. But later, Shangdi sort of evolved into this force called Tian. And Tian is a more impersonal force, where Shangdi is more personified as like a high male god. Tian is like a genderless, impersonal force. And throughout ancient China, the ruler was always understood as possessing what's called a mandate from heaven. This is similar to, in Europe, the divine right of kings, believing that somehow the heavens or divinity has selected rulers to be rulers, and therefore they have some sort of sanction or authority from the spirit world or from the heavens. Cosmic balance. So this is getting into Taoism. So Taoism is all about cosmic balance, and according to Taoist thought, everything is comprised of this one substance called qi. It's spelled Qi, but it's pronounced qi. And qi is an impersonal, self-generating, physical, spiritual substance. So like Hinduism, Taoism is monistic. It thinks everything is comprised of this one physical, spiritual substance that's impersonal and self-generating. So it's not gendered. It's kind of like Brahman. So this is a parallel we can draw. However, qi has two aspects. Yin, a dark, receptive female aspect, and yang, a bright, assertive male aspect. I'm sure we've all seen yin-yangs, that circle that's kind of swoopily divided, and the yin part is black with a white dot in it, and the yang part is white with a black dot. That's a Taoist symbol, an ancient Taoist symbol. And it's important to note it's yin yang, not yin yang. They don't parallel. The words don't completely parallel. People often sort of insert a G on yin. So qi is comprised of these two forces or two aspects that interact with each other and are sort of defined by their relation with each other. And it's not that one is good or one is evil. Taoists reject good and evil as like independent, objective realities. They think that human beings totally invent value judgments of good and evil. The word Tao means the way, and it is understood as the creative rhythm of the universe. So yin and yang are constantly interacting with each other and flowing in and out of each other, and the rhythm that creates is known as the Tao. And the goal of spiritual practice for Taoists is to become one or enter the flow of the Tao and enter the natural harmony of the universe, the harmony of qi as it is expressed through the interplay of yin and yang, and that interplay is known as the Tao. So more about the complementarity of Taoism and Confucianism. There are two contrasting ways of harmonizing with the cosmos. So Taoism is more focused on like mysticism and a more religious understanding of harmony, where you're trying to create the one in harmony with the Tao, which is this mystical flow of or energy of the universe. And Confucianism rather is more focused on political and moral harmony. It's focused on social harmony. So Taoism is more metaphysical. Metaphysical means like pertaining to the nature of reality as humans interpret it. So Taoism is concerned with these metaphysical concepts like Tao and Qi and the nature of the universe and the nature of reality. So Taoism, in summation, is focused on metaphysical harmony, whereas Confucianism is focused on social harmony. And you should be able to express that. And the book kind of is clever and says like yin and yang, they, referring to Taoism and Confucianism, interpenetrate and complement each other and are themselves evolving dynamically. So the book is like, trying to take it to another level and say that Taoism and Confucianism are like metaphorically yin and yang in Chinese religious thought or philosophical thought. Some more about Taoism, the way of nature and immortality. So Taoism is a system that influences Chan and Zen Buddhism, which we've studied in the last lecture. And there are variations within Taoism, and it's because the word Taoism has a similar history as the word Hinduism. The practices that we call Taoism had no name until it was distinguished from Confucianism. So here's a quote that sort of explains the history of the word Taoism. Taoism is actually a label invented by scholars and awkwardly stretched to cover a philosophical or literati tradition. Literati just means like the elite literate class when literacy wasn't commonplace. A multitude of self-cultivation and longevity techniques, and an assortment of religious sects, which probably developed in part from early philosophical texts and practices. So it's a catch-all label for a lot of different systems of ancient Chinese thought that are indigenous to China, that are just different from Confucianism, which has more defined parameters. So some teachings of Taoist sages. The most famous Taoist text and a famous scripture that's very short and widely read is the Tao Te Ching, which means the classic of the way and its power. And the way would be like the Tao. And it was, according to legend, it was written for a border guard by Lao Tzu, and Lao Tzu just translates as old master. And according to legend, this occurred, it was written in the 6th century before the Common Era, but more textual evidence suggests that it was written later in about 350 before the Common Era as a response or an alternative to Confucianism. And in this text, there's a concern with improving harmony in life by being receptive and quiet. Another Taoist thinker, Zhuangzi, and those are the dates of his life, sort of advocated detaching from the absurdity of civilization. So there is a strand of Taoist thought that thinks of civilization as bringing a lack of harmony. Because if you think about it in terms of Taoism trying to seek harmony with the universe, that can kind of look like harmony with nature, and civilization is often concerned with overcoming nature or imposing artificiality on nature. And both of these thinkers emphasize that you cannot describe the Tao, but you can live in harmony with it. The Tao is sort of too mysterious for us to be able to really say much about it, other than you can achieve harmony with it. So living in harmony with the Tao, what this might look like is you would experience a transcendent unity rather than separation by ceasing to feel personal preferences. So if the world is ultimately one, our preferences of this over that sort of reify that this is separate from that. So you can see how that's related, that if you want to experience the oneness of Qi in the flow of the Tao, through everything, you need to stop sort of seeing everything as solidified and separate. And another way of experiencing this harmony with the Tao would be seeing things as they are, not as good or bad. So according to most Taoist thought, our value, things just are. And when we say label them good or bad, that labeling is a value judgment that is entirely a human value judgment. Nature does not possess that value judgment. There is no like stone tablet in the sky saying what's right or wrong, what's good and evil. That whole enterprise of morality and value judgment is a human enterprise, according to Taoist thought, and it's an enterprise that can separate you from nature. Often, Taoist sages use a metaphor of flowing water as a model for being, that the Tao is just this flow, and it's in flux at all times. So a complex concept is the concept of Wu Wei, which translates as actionless action. So it's sort of paradoxical. Or action without ego assertion is a way of thinking about it. And this would look like allowing the Tao to take its course, resulting in non-interference. So you should act still, but act in such a way where you're not asserting yourself against the flow of energy of the universe, sort of minimizing ego assertion and trying to act in a way where you're one with everything and not interfering with the natural flow of things. Civilization and balance in Taoism. So again, nothing is evil. These are value judgments that are created by humans. However, there is a lack of balance that can arise in nature and in the universe. However, most Taoists would believe that the world is naturally in harmony and that acting in accordance with the Tao and being one with the Tao is our original nature. And so again, civilization is the culprit. So here's a quote: civilization, with its intellectual attempts to improve on things and its rigid views of morality, actually leads the world to chaos, Taoists warn. So that kind of sums up what we've been saying about the relationship between nature and civilization, according to Taoist thought. And so there's great value placed on withdrawing from civilization and society to a contemplative, nature-loving life. So popular religion and organized Taoism. So over time, Taoism becomes somewhat institutionalized and sort of becomes intertwined with other like popular religious beliefs and practices. So Taoist specialists took over some spiritual tasks that were just part of popular Chinese religion that weren't originally a part of Taoism, like alchemy. Um, so alchemy is sort of just it just loosely means transformation. In the West, when we talk about alchemists, when we talk about alchemy, we talk specifically about this sort of mythologic, legendary practice and figures that were attempting to turn regular matter into gold. But in China, when we're talking about alchemy, excuse me, when we're talking about alchemy, we're just talking about either inner transformation or some sort of outer transformation more loosely. Another popular Chinese religious concept is feng shui. I'm sure you've heard about it. In China, in its original context, it means geomancy, which is determining the natural flow of qi through the earth. How it plays out in the West is you might hear about people using feng shui to determine like the flow of energy in a room and how to best arrange furniture in a room. So that's how it's used in the West, but it just means just being in tune with the flow of energy of qi and not placing things, including yourself, in the way of that flow. Another popular religious practice was sort of deifying dead rulers, or once a ruler died, thinking of them as divine in some way. And organized Taoism began participating in that. Another ancient Chinese indigenous practice was revering talismans. And a talisman is an amulet or charm whose presence exercises a remarkable or powerful influence on human feelings or actions. It's kind of like a good luck charm. Inner alchemy. So this is like inner transformation. And this was a part of the concern of part of an elite thread of ancient traditions interwoven with Taoism at different moments. And it involves individual spiritual practices for the sake of inner transformation, self-cultivation, longevity, so literally elongating your life, and to the extent of even perhaps becoming immortal. And these practices typically are different ascetic or self-denying, pleasure-denying practices that were passed from teacher to pupil. And that's really all we need to say about that. So the longevity in more detail, you activate forces for longevity in the body through breathing techniques, diets, gymnastics, meditations, visualizations, and even sexual techniques. Zhuangzi counseled indifference to life and death, so that's a contradiction within Taoism that we can make sense of again if we understand that Taoism is a sort of artificial catch-all label. Lao Tzu, the author of the Tao Te Ching, referred to the spiritual death of the individual self, quote, the body and mind transmuted into selfless vehicles for the eternal. So there's some understanding that in a legendary sense, you can become immortal or live unfathomably long periods of time if your ego dies and you just become a vessel of the eternal. The Queen Mother of the West is a popular figure. She's a revered celestial being. She guards the elixir of life that's associated with immortality, and she's often considered an incarnation of yin energy. So this is sort of like a divine feminine that's at play. Some Taoist sects. So Taoism becomes institutionalized during the decline of the Han Dynasty, and those are the dates. Celestial masters were a hereditary priesthood founded by Zheng Daoling, who believed he was a representative of the Tao on earth. So the celestial masters are a sect with a hereditary priesthood. Highest Purity Taoism is another sect based on revelations received from a deceased family member, Lady Wei, into an aristocratic family, and they are an elite group of celibates, and they were founded in 365 of the Common Era. You don't need to remember all this. I'm just giving you an idea of how Taoism became institutionalized. Another sect is the Complete Perfection sect, and this was founded in the 12th century. It's the dominant monastic school, uniting Taoist inner alchemy, Chan Buddhist meditation, and Confucian social morality. And the present Taoist canon was compiled in 1445 of the Common Era and contains 1,500 scriptures. Taoism today. So all forms of Taoist practice are still actively undertaken today in communist mainland China, Taiwan, Hong Kong, Korea, and Chinese communities overseas. Chinese temples often combine Confucian, Buddhist, and Taoist elements, but the liturgies tend to be Taoist. And Taoist monks and nuns, interestingly enough, are considered equal. They have equal status, unlike in Buddhism. So now on to Confucianism, the practice of virtue. Confucianism is sort of a moral philosophy, in a sense, that's concerned with cultivating virtue. So Westerners call the founder of Confucianism Confucius, but the Chinese honored him as Kong Fuzi, or Master Kong. Rujiao is the teaching of the scholars, and that's an ancient Chinese belief that is a collection of ancient Chinese beliefs in heaven, ancestor worship, and rituals developed by Confucius in a school of thought, which emphasizes moral virtues, interaction between human rulers in heaven, and political involvement. So Confucius was sort of reheating Rujiao, which is these ancient Chinese beliefs. So Taoism and Confucianism. Taoism and Buddhism emphasize the ever-changing nature of the cosmos. Confucianism instead focuses on a just and orderly society by connecting human beings to the moral will of heaven. And here's a quote from the textbook. Individuals often harmonize the apparently opposite characteristics of Taoism and Confucianism in their own lives and feel no need to identify themselves as followers of only one religious path. So you see a lot of syncretism, given that these systems are so complementarity involved, and they have different emphases that are radically different. Master Kong's life. So those are the dates, and before the Common Era, he lived during the Zhou dynasty. His family lost relatively high status through different political struggles. His father died at a young age. He married at 19 and had at least 2 children. His mother died when he was 23, and he mourned for 3 years by living ascetically and studying ancient ceremonial rites known as Li and imperial institutions. In reaction to political chaos, Confucius trained young men to be wise and altruistic public servants. He originally, during his life, had approximately 3,000 disciples, but 72 main ones collected and spread his teachings. He emphasized rulers to perform rituals and be models of high moral character. And this is important. He emphasized himself as a transmitter and not a creator of a new system. Quote, he said, "I believe in and have a passion for the ancients." So he understood himself as a student of Rujiao and just like a reheater of Rujiao, who's bringing that back. So the Confucian classics. There were originally 6 classics of China's cultural heritage, but Confucius dropped music, and they were poetry, history, rituals, dance, and the Book of Rites, which includes the Great Learning and the Doctrine of the Mean. The Doctrine of the Mean is what it sounds. It's just advocating moderation in everything. The Confucian virtues. So there are 5 cardinal virtues encouraged by Confucius. humaneness, righteousness and justice, civility, which plays out as like ritual propriety, properly participating in rituals, wisdom, and faithfulness. Ren is an important concept. It translates as one of the cardinal virtues, as humaneness. It also can translate as innate goodness, love, benevolence, perfect virtue, and human-heartedness. It is the foremost among the virtues. Confucius felt it could save society. And interestingly enough, the Chinese character for Ren is a combination of the character for two and person, conveying relationality. So relationships are really important in Confucian thought. So specific relations that were emphasized by Confucius include parent and child, older and younger siblings, husband and wife, ruler and subject, friend and friend. Those first four are all hierarchical, meaning the first in the pair has power or authority over the latter, or the second in the pair. So a parent has authority over a child. Unfortunately, this is an overtly patriarchal system. So a husband over a wife, older siblings over younger siblings, and of course, rulers over subjects. Shu is a concept, though, that emphasizes reciprocal hierarchy. So although the person that's the subordinate owes respect and to follow and obey the one above them that has the authority, the one with the authority has a reciprocal duty to care for those underneath them. So, for example, the ruler is a parent to all people and links them through ritual to heaven, and that's the prime exemplar of Ren. And in Confucian thought, there's an emphasis on filial piety, which is reverence for family members, specifically care for parents and obedience towards parents and honoring one's parents. Confucianism after Confucius. So the two major Confucian commentators include Meng Zhi, known as the secondary sage, who emphasized the inherent goodness of human nature, and Sunzi, who was born when Menzi was elderly. And he emphasized human nature as being self-centered, on the other hand, and thought of heaven as impersonal. Both agree, quote, the appropriate practice of virtue is of great value. Humans can attain this through self-cultivation, and study and emulation of the ancient sages are the path to harmony in the individual, family, state, and world, with proper relationships between heaven, earth, and humans. So this is basically a system of virtue ethics that would bring order to society. So is Confucianism a religion? It really sounds like just a moral philosophy trying to instill social harmony. But Professor Rodney L. Taylor argues that, quote, the key to the religious interpretation of Confucianism lies in the role of heaven, not just as an authority for the stability of society, but as a source of religious authority and inspiration for the individual. So Confucianism is arguably a religion because of the mandate of heaven. So you have all these reciprocal hierarchical relationships, but at the top is the ruler, and where the ruler gets his ultimate authority is from heaven, is from the heavens, from some sort of divinity, from something sort of supernatural. And so that's what imbues the whole system with authority and power. Neo-Confucianism. So a revived form of Confucianism arose during the Song dynasty, and Confucian thought permeated the education system of China. It further developed a metaphysical basis for Confucianism in Neo-Confucianism, where the individual is linked with all of the cosmos. And women are subordinated, it's overtly patriarchal, but they're valued as virtuous and it's considered necessary to educate them. Confucianism in the modern world. In 1949, you have the establishment of the communist regime in China. Chairman Mao's Little Red Book replaced the Confucian classics. The Cultural Revolution, which took place between 1966 and 1976, involved Confucianism being attacked for filial piety and hierarchy, because communism, everyone is radically equal in communist thought, and they want to abandon nepotism or favoritism towards family members. Yet, since there's an emphasis on virtue, on the virtue of selfless service and self-improvement for the public good, there was some overlap between the new communist values and Confucianism. Today in communist China, China is technically, it's by label communist, but it's really just capitalism without democracy. But anyways, today it's now, Confucianism is popular, and there's an intellectual interest in various religions throughout China that's on the rise. So that's happening even though the Communist Party is officially atheistic. And the reason why they're allowing sort of the pursuit of religion when they didn't previously is because they've come to see religion as useful socially. So the government regards Confucianism as a philosophy and is beginning to encourage its study. And then you have this sort of new capitalist Confucianism, which is a blending of business conducted according to Confucian ethics. So questions. What is the importance of harmony within Daoism and Confucianism? I would focus on answering this question by saying that Daoism is concerned with metaphysical harmony, and explain what that means. That means harmony with the universe as it's understood through concepts like qi and Tao and yin and yang. And Confucianism is concerned with social harmony and provides a system of virtue ethics that is imbued with authority because the ruler has a mandate from heaven. And why might Confucianism be understood as a religion, and why might it be considered a philosophy? The whole point of understanding it as a religion is because the ruler at the top of the hierarchy is given authority by what's called the mandate from heaven. So the heavens, or some sort of divinity, is what gives the system its authority and legitimacy. But it's more of a philosophy in the sense that the way it plays out is the focus more is on social harmony. And describe the complementarity of Daoism and Confucianism. It'd be cool if you talked about how they kind of function like yin and yang, the way the textbook sort of used that metaphor. And that's because Daoism is focused on metaphysics and the nature of reality, and Confucianism, again, is focused on social harmony. So that is it for Lecture 6 on Daoism and Confucianism. Next will be a lecture on Shinto.